Your leadership and the great work of Prospect Silicon Valley. We are so proud to have Prospect Silicon Valley here in the city of San Jose. They have been an incredible partner and leader for us and for the region. We're also proud of the rich tradition of innovation we have here in San Jose. Not all of it technological. San Jose, some of you may not know, was the birthplace of fruit cocktail. We are also the city in which the Eggo waffle was invented. And so, if you don't think those innovations are important, ask your 6-year-old, and I can assure you San Jose will be on the map. So, we are just 5 days before Election Day, and you're about to hear from a lot of very bright people who know an awful lot more than I do. And so my campaign manager, of course, has directed me to only deliver the good news. You'll hear fluff from me and facts, of course, from our experts. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in the city of San Jose. And in addition to my day job as mayor here, I'm also the chair of the Valley Transportation Authority and our countywide transit and traffic management agency. And so we're fortunate, I think, to have two organizations that have really embraced the imperative to innovate in the face of growing uncertainty over innovation. And let me emphasize, and I'm certainly honored to be with so many innovators in the clean tech space and transportation. Let me tell you all that you are brave people. You're brave people because this is a perilous time to be an innovator. There are a lot of growing fears in the public, expressed certainly through the media, about tech's growing role in our lives. And those fears are growing more and more acute by the day, whether we're reading headlines about Russian bots manipulating voter sentiment and data that may or may not be well used by particular companies, collisions with autonomous vehicles resulting in fatalities, rising concerns over the loss of privacy and security around data. These risks around innovation are growing more palpable daily. And so too, certainly for cities and local governments, it is a perilous time for all of us to learn how to be smarter. So for all the bold pronouncements about cities leading the world in climate change and innovation, we need to remember that cities and all local governments are still bureaucracies. Like all governmental institutions, we are fundamentally risk averse. We are not particularly well rewarded for successful outcomes, utilizing risky strategies. That, of course, is a point of departure and distinction between ourselves and the private sector. It's also fair to say that in the public sector, failures are immediately public and quite widely publicized. So failing forward is more challenging in the public sector, I think, than it is in the private sector. And so naturally, we need help. We need expertise. We need great partners like Prospect Silicon Valley. And of course, most importantly, we need great partners in the private sector. So it is my view that cities and local governments and agencies like VTA will succeed if they have embraced the imperative to innovate, in spite of all those risks that I described. And the reason why I believe that is because I think the status quo is quite a bit more perilous than whatever risks are posed by innovation and change. We've got a planet that's increasingly threatened by climate change and a rising sea level. We've got a region that is potentially crippled in its efforts to grow by freeways that are masquerading as parking lots. I guess this would be a good time to point out that Regional Measure 3 is on your ballot in 5 days. We're seeing rise of pedestrian and bike fatalities nationally. Certainly safety is a greater concern. And of course, the fiscal path for local governments, cities in particular. We know it is certainly challenged by rising costs due to unfunded liabilities from everything from pensions to infrastructure. And so we critically need to think differently about how we deliver services. We can't do so the same way. We need innovation and technology as a force multiplier. And so the cities that will succeed will be those that embrace risk. And I really want to emphasize embrace. It cannot be our job to eliminate risk. And if it is our job even to minimize risk, we will be failing. We have to confront risk, understand it, and manage it. And we simply have to lean in to recognize the public benefit of private innovation. So there are a few areas I know that will be top of mind for an awful lot of us in the next few hours. I'd just like to mention a couple. Certainly we all recognize that here in the Bay Area, as we consider the challenges of greenhouse gas emissions and how we're going to reduce them, transportation sector, that is the source of more than half of those greenhouse gas emissions, certainly should be our target. And we have a great opportunity with the electrification of our transportation infrastructure. Our EV charging infrastructure is certainly old news here in San Jose, and we're proud to have been the place a decade ago that really launched efforts with a company then called Cologne, now ChargePoint, to get public charging out there, get the infrastructure in place so we could beta test and demonstrate how we can make this work. We obviously have a lot more work to do to build out that infrastructure. We're seeing efforts certainly from transit agencies like Caltrain to electrify, but that's not terribly novel. After all, that's a system technology that was built when Abraham Lincoln was president. Certainly electrification is long overdue. But I think what's more exciting as we think about the electrification of our transportation infrastructure is looking at our public bus fleets. City of San Jose has made the choice to opt with a local company here, Proterra, choosing an entirely electric bus fleet at our airport, and perhaps more significantly, VTA. This year, 5 electric buses will be out there, 35 buses within a couple of years. This is a great opportunity, and certainly not just for the obvious reasons that we think electric buses will deliver us to a more sustainable future, but we're seeing new opportunities in how we integrate those vehicles with our grid. And infrastructure optimization is going to be really critical for us, we know, in the coming years. Minimizing stress on the electric grid as our transportation infrastructure is electrified is going to be critical, whether we're trying to reduce the cost of electric charging or simply to boost grid reliability. We know this will be a topic of very active interest and investigation. VTA is making itself the case study for the rest of the country in this regard, with many partners, including Symposium, Proterra. I know I mispronounced Consensum. I do that every time, so my apologies for our Consensum team members here. I got it right? That's the first time ever. Thank you. But Proterra and VTA, Prospect Silicon Valley, and the National Renewable Energy Lab, lots of partners here are working on seeing how we can address the challenges in a grid that will be increasingly facing all kinds of issues, including the intermittency of renewable electricity sources that we know will become larger and larger share of our portfolio. So we look forward to these and many other efforts to see how we can electrify our transportation infrastructure intelligently and successfully. And of course, all this electrification won't help much if we've got an electric grid that's still primarily driven by fossil fuels. And so we are focusing increasingly here in the city of San Jose around greening the grid. We are proud to become what will be the largest city in the country to launch community choice aggregation, providing all of our residents and businesses the choice of their source of their electricity. That will be launching very soon. We have got a great new leader of that effort, Lori Mitchell, who will be pushing out several options that will include high shares of renewable, including a zero GHG option for residents who want to choose that at prices competitive with our local utility. In September, we'll have a launch here as a municipal customer of that electricity. We're essentially going to eat our own dog food and figure out how this works. And early next year, in March, I understand, we'll have a citywide launch with 1 million customers. And boy, do I hope that goes well. So more to come on that. We've also got a very active team here working on autonomy. And I know a lot of folks here who have been working on it for many years. We were blessed here in the city of San Jose to bring in many bright people from the private sector. And Kip Arkness was mentioned, who's leading our efforts on the city manager's side, Shreen Santosham here in our mayor's office, and Jill North, who really is taking on this autonomy project herself as the lead. She has worked with the industry to convene roundtables to really understand best what is the public value here in autonomy. Let's make sure that we understand that clearly and we're asking the right questions and we're doing this in a public space for public benefit. We issued a request for information last year, really to see how we could solve our greatest mobility problems, and not simply being a testing ground for autonomous vehicles, but rather seeing how we can help, for example, low-income seniors or homeless veterans that lack transit lines to be able to engage in the economy and the community better with clear connections provided by autonomous vehicles. We're linking key destinations in high congestion corridors. We're sharing data and trying to understand better how that data helps us manage our transportation network. And the city is participating with the private sector by giving up curbside pickup and drop-off spaces, ensuring we give access for charging stations and open API for real-time traffic signal data. All those kinds of efforts are really just efforts to see how we can be a better place to partner with the private sector. So far, we received 31 proposals to our request for information, and we're launching our first pilots this year. And yes, we're launching the pilots in spite of the risks. We certainly read the headlines like everyone else does. And yes, we all share those concerns, and that's why we're considering the need for redundancy of LiDAR. In the case of potential malfunctions, looking at every potential safety enhancement, because we want this and know we want this to be safe, and we know it has to be safe. It's going to be out there in the public right away. And I think there are certainly intriguing next steps to consider, even in a world without full autonomy. How we might, for example, reconsider the public right-of-way where we currently have transit, light rail, for example, and how we might bring autonomy into our transit system. This is not a terribly new idea. After all, BART was created originally in the 1960s to become an autonomous system. It didn't work out that way. Fair to say politics sometimes drive results, so we've got drivers in every BART train. Nonetheless, the VTA and the city own a lot of right-of-way. And the question is are light rail cars really the optimal way to use that space? Or would we be better off with autonomous buses? We can imagine how autonomous buses might operate along light rail lines, and the first generation stay clearly within those confines, and then the second generation might have those autonomous buses making left and right turns off of the main lines to deliver folks to higher quality destinations. We can see there are great opportunities here, and we look forward to exploring them with you. Finally, as we think about the right-of-way and what is in the public sphere, there's certainly a lot of interest and competition for what goes on our public infrastructure, particularly our streetlight poles and other vertical infrastructure. We've benefited from great collaborations. We're working now, for example, with Facebook, and they're working to see how they can launch what they call a teragraph initiative to bring free high-speed Wi-Fi at gigabit speeds to residents and businesses here in the downtown and surrounding neighborhoods, utilizing new backhaul technology. But we also know there's a lot of interest from a variety of different companies, particularly telecoms, who are jockeying for position on that scarce real estate of streetlight poles. And as much as I say that we need government to be leaning in and to be embracing risk, we also see through this very important conversation the imperative for government to be a player and in playing a major role. We need to ensure that there are open and fair rules for competition over that scarce space. We need to ensure that that space in the public right-of-way is in fact a platform for innovation, so that there is access for innovators large and small, and the most recent entrants to the market are not squeezed out by the dominant players. And we need, of course, to ensure that the public is protected in terms of security, privacy, safety, and that taxpayers are in fact getting their money's worth out of the infrastructure they're paying for. And so we are certainly very deeply engaged in conversations with telecoms and many IoT companies to see how we can better utilize this public right-of-way to ensure we are not just a smart city and a sustainable city, but a city that is fundamentally bettering the public interest. We look forward to exploring all these innovations with you and partnering with you to make San Jose the most innovative city on the planet, and with that, hopefully paving the way for other cities to follow to ensure that we can achieve our goals for sustainability and for equity. Thank you all for being part of this. We look forward to partnering with you for many years to come.